Another year has come and gone, and with it, another birthday has happened. I am now officially 28 today, one step closer to that guaranteed uncle status, if I'm not already there according to some of the youngins. And you know what? I thought of something. Since I did a ranking of every single Trails game last year, I wanted to spend this year ranking all of the Final Fantasy games as I finally played through all of them. Now, one rule I'm going to say about this one is very simple. We're not going to do 11 or 14. We're just going to focus solely on the mainline single-player Final Fantasies. I'll definitely get to videos about 11 and 14 one of these days, but until I get more experience with them, I'm just not going to try to say how good they are. With that said, grab your potions, find the right equipment, make sure to wish me a happy birthday down below, maybe even like and sub to check out more of what I've made. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Yeah, so this one may seem like kind of a cop-out pick considering its reputation as the worst Final Fantasy, but after experiencing for myself, I really do think Final Fantasy II is the weakest game in the entire franchise. While I can definitely give it the respect it deserves for all of the things that it brought to the franchise, like Cid and the Chocobos, and there were even some pretty neat concepts here, like using certain keywords to progress the plot when you talk to story-specific characters, alongside having the guts to be as dark as it was for the time, that doesn't save it from being an immensely dull experience. Gameplay is arguably the most unbalanced and boring the franchise has ever had, where you're spending most of it either being way too strong or way too weak due to how making your characters gain stats works. And while they try to add more depth to the casting and story, it kind of rings hollow when nothing really sticks outside of the Emperor being over the top evil. If there's ever cause for a Final Fantasy getting a remake, I'd definitely say it was 2 that deserves it the most, as even if I'm critical of it, there's potential for things to work here. I've seen that one Romancing Saga remake going around recently, and I think that's what I'd like to see if we ever get a 2 remake. But until that happens, it stays the main series' lowest point. Now this is going to be a controversial pick for some, but yeah, I think I put Final Fantasy VIII pretty low on this list. There's aspects of this game I like, its improved graphics in comparison to 7, plus it did have some pretty cool ideas in terms of gameplay like the junction system, and I do like the story up to a certain point, but just because it has things I like, doesn't save it from any of its problems. The draw mechanic is one of the most dull mechanics to be utilized in the game, to the point that in order to actually use it to its full potential, you're actually just better off skipping it entirely and just focusing on the card stuff. Hell, it doesn't even really require you to super dive into it because you can just do stuff like equip fire spells for full strength, meaning you never really have to think about what you equip half the time. Spells are just better than others in some areas. And while the story is good for the most part, once you get to the Ultimacia reveal, it goes downhill pretty fast. And I'm going to say right now, I do not like the romance between Squall and Riona. I think it would have been a lot better if they just naturally got together instead of leaving it up to player choice dialogue options to push the relationship. Especially since those nicer, more friendly options don't exactly fit the tone of the main character, Squall. It's got good ideas, like I said, the execution just ended up being a big problem. I think another game tackling it could have probably ironed out the kinks, but due to its reception, I don't really think Square wants to try this kind of approach to gameplay ever again. So for this spot, I was severely contemplating whether or not this game or the game after it would be next. And after a bit of thought, I kind of realized I wanted to pick this one, as even if the one after it has its own share of issues, I think this game deserves to be here because of just how straight up egregious some of the practices of this title were. There are definitely positives I have about 15, like the cast of characters being immensely likable, the world being very big and expansive. However, 15's egregious practices with things like the DLC and cutting several of the story beats into pieces to sell to the player was just plain old disgusting. I get that the Royal Edition ended up fixing a portion of these issues, but that still doesn't give the original any sort of get out of jail free card for all the shit it tried to pull. I know, there was also stuff like the 13 and Versus 13 stuff, but at the end of the day, I genuinely can't forgive it. The story as a result of all of this cutting kind of falls apart at the halfway point, and the gameplay, especially the camera, is liable to give you motion sickness as things just turn into a giant clusterfuck of nonsense the more enemies existed on screen. And while I mentioned before that the Royal Edition does exist, the fact that I have to buy a second version of this game to get stuff that should have just been included in the package, and the game still didn't blow me away, is kind of telling how badly handled this whole experience ended up being. Yeah, for those who have been following my Twitter for a while, this may seem like a bit of an odd placement considering how often I was praising it during my playthrough,
And don't get me wrong, I still have praises for it, like the game's story and just how damn good the character dynamics were. Hell, I still forever stand by the fact that Hope and Lightning's dynamic is arguably one of the best relationships in the entire franchise. They knocked that shit straight out of the park for a home run. And I'll even admit it, this game still looks amazing to this day. It's just kind of a shame that when it comes to being an actual video game, it falls flat pretty hard. Not only is the game just a set of straight hallways where they don't even try to hide the linearity, Jesus Christ, but battles arguably end up being the most dull the series has had. Things like the paradigm shift, if that's how you pronounce it, and the Crystallium are interesting ideas on paper, but their execution in battles outside of boss fights is severely lacking. Battles end up so automated now that to the point where all you have to do is just hit the auto chain function and it does everything for you. And the shift is only really needed at points when you need to heal, which arguably gets stamped out by the Renew skill later on. Alongside that, the ridiculous amount of Crystallium points you have to pay just for minor upgrades is kind of ridiculous in the late game. Like, why am I paying 10,000 points just for Magic plus 15 or something? That just seems a little much, don't you think? So, while I do definitely think 13 has good in it and excels in areas, at the end of the day, its job was to be a video game, and personally, I don't think it did a very good job at being that. With that said, that's all of the games that had more issues than they did pros. Let's get into the more positive side of the rankings now. Now, before you ask, the original isn't this low because I think it's really bad or anything like that. It's actually a title I have quite a lot of respect for. It was the OG, after all, the game that not only was the savior of the company, but even with its age in mind, still works as a very fun game to go back and play through. The only real reason it's down this far is because it just kind of suffers from being a product of its time. It was a game when there wasn't really things like stories or characters to get attached to. As a result, it's just kind of playing through a single-player D&D campaign. And if I'm being honest, as time has gone on, a lot of games that have come out after it, I believe, have surpassed the original. In all honesty, it's also one of the only titles on this list where the original is arguably the worst version to experience it in because of just how much stuff just straight up doesn't work in it. And you're better off playing any of the remakes that came after it. That said, it is still an immensely fun and solid experience, and very much worth visiting if you want to see the franchise's humble beginnings in their most pure form. Or maybe play that one Final Fantasy fan remake that they called Renaissance or something? Man, I really need to check that out at some point because it seems really cool. I get to be a Dragoon, and who doesn't love being Dragoons? You know, when I first ever started Final Fantasy XII, all I really knew about the title was that it was arguably one of the most divisive amongst its fans, both old and new. And after playing it for myself, I walked away from this series' 12th entry enjoying myself a lot more than I expected. Don't get me wrong, it's got some massive problems. The director leaving basically midway through, having them shoehorn in a different ending to the narrative that massively feels like they're jumping the shark once you get to it. Alongside a couple of weird gameplay decisions like not letting you buy things like teleport stones from stores, so you have a lot of, and I mean a lot of backtracking to do on foot, if you don't get lucky and get one from an enemy or monster that is. It definitely has some pretty flawed parts of its experience. However, as a video game, I can't think of a more impressive Final Fantasy in terms of content. The amount of just sheer stuff you can do in this game just kind of boggles the mind. You can explore areas, fight extra bosses. There's just a downright staggering amount of side content. And I'll say it right here now, I actually really enjoyed the new combat. I like this auto-attack form of combat considering I'm a massive Xenoblade fan, it makes sense. And I think 12 does a great job. I especially enjoyed playing around with the Gambit system. While it was a bit bloated at points, I really liked turning my characters into absolute killing machines that just melted every health bar they came across when they fought an enemy. It felt great visiting towns that felt like these giant sprawling cities, alongside exploring the really fun license board and job system. 12 has its issues, but if you're looking for a Final Fantasy with a lot of stuff to do, then this is the one for you. So this was kind of a tricky one, as originally I had it higher on my list of titles, but after re-experiencing this game and fully seeing it once more, I think this spot fits it very well. Now there's a lot I love about Final Fantasy III. It's my favorite of the NES era hands down, and introduced the absolutely wonderful job system into Final Fantasies that we would later get a perfected version on in Final Fantasy V. I love a lot of the dungeons, and a lot of the jobs are really fun to do, with my personal favorite being Black Belt. And it's a very well-balanced Final Fantasy, for the most parts. So what knocks it lower on the list? Well, first off, it's easily the Crystal Tower. As much as I love this game, that final stretch of the game is one of the worst in the entire franchise, if not the absolute worst. Going through this multi-hour long dungeon in an era where there weren't save points in dungeons And at any point, if you failed, you had to restart the whole thing. Combine the fact that once you go through that hellish gauntlet, you have to face what might be one of the worst final bosses in all of the JRPGs I've played. Really kicks this game in the teeth. It was basically perfect, and then this final section comes and slaps you so hard in the nuts that you'll wonder why you even liked it in the first place. If you want to experience this game for yourself, do yourself a favor and get the Pixel Remaster so you don't have to go through the agonizing bullshit of the final section. The final boss still sucks though, so be prepared for that. Oof, I am gonna get flack from this one, and boy oh boy, I really don't care, because this is my list and I can do whatever I want. Plus, it's my birthday, so you can't tell me I'm wrong, so save all your complaints for July 15th, bitches. And before you come to conclusions, no, this isn't because I like making fun of the fanbase from time to time. My thoughts in the game are purely cut away from how the fanbase feel about it. And I do think Final Fantasy VII is a good game. There's a lot of enjoy and downright respect about it. It was the first to bring the franchise to full 3D. A lot of the shots in the game are still absolutely beautiful to look at to this day. And I really like playing around with the materia system. As a customizable system, it's fantastic. Even if it does kind of get dumbed down by how abusable the limits are. It's a good game. Quite good. I just don't think it's the top dog game in the series. Some of that is due to how dated some of the character models can be, because let's be real here, this is just a PS1 Roblox game. And I would rather chew glass than go through half of the minigames that they throw at you. But even if I have my own gripes, I do genuinely like the game, and I can see why so many people grew attached to it back when it was released. I just don't personally think it's the best in the series. So, thinking back of when I first ever played Final Fantasy XVI, I had an immense level of positives to say about the game. And while admittedly I believe my thoughts on the title have gotten a little more cynical as of late upon a revisit, I still really enjoy 16. Yeah, it's way too easy, and it definitely could have leaned more into its RPG elements, as well as I felt that they weren't even there half the time. But man, as an actual experience, this game was fucking awesome. Clive's story as he travels along while trying to heal from the sins of the past and bring forth a new world, since his one has basically just been poisoned by the crystals themselves, is really fascinating to follow. And the combat is immensely fun. It could have used more, like I would have liked if I could have equipped different weapons for different combos, but man, the utilization of the icon skills alongside those crazy dominant battles give Final Fantasy XVI this over-the-top crazy energy that you don't really get from other Final Fantasy titles. Is the foundation of it flawed? Yes. I honestly hope when 17 comes around they try to learn from the mistakes of this one, but man, it was a very fun experience for what it was. You know, it's kind of weird thinking back on this whole list before I had started going through all of the Final Fantasy titles, as for the longest time, the only one I had ever actually beaten was Final Fantasy IV. It had a lot of importance to me as one of my childhood games. One of my fondest memories was beating it a long time ago, and I still hold it close to my heart, even now. That said, when you look at it as a whole product, it's got some flaws. I'm happy that this game pushed forward things like storytelling and character development for these titles, and introduced the series to the active time battle system, which would go on to be arguably my favorite combat system this series has ever had. This game is honestly held back by its absolutely ridiculous urge to not let any death really matter. This game will go through fake out death after fake out death constantly, and out of the dozen or so characters you meet, only one actually stays dead, and it's the old man in like his fucking 80s or something. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm fine with a fake out death or two. Like, I'm a Trails fan. I'm fine with that shit if it's like spaced out decently. But Final Fantasy IV does it so much, it would make Trails games blush. Like, when you have what feels like 10 fake out deaths in a single game, it makes the story a lot harder to take seriously, and actively just starts getting on my nerves more than anything else. And while there were a lot of things that were added to this game that I'm very happy about outside of the active time battle system, like the ability to now save in dungeons, it feels like they kind of over-relied on that being your healing source, considering they don't even let you do shit like buy ethers until the end of the game. Which wouldn't really be a massive problem in games like Final Fantasy III, where you use D&D magic points, but 4 has you use MP, so that just makes it way more irritating than necessary. This game still means a lot to me, and I'm still happy it was the first ever Final Fantasy I had beaten. Man, I love Final Fantasy V so damn much. Easily one of the most underrated titles in the entire franchise that sadly got screwed over due to an awful translation on the PS1. But if you ever played the GBA or Pixel Remaster, you would see just how damn good of a game it is. Not only did this game take the job systems from 3 and bring them to their ultimate level by combining their original skills together with things like passives and the ability to mix and max 2 jobs onto a single character, allowed for some absolutely bonkers customization. But it was also the game that had a lot of the most interesting boss fights in the entire franchise. My personal favorites being the Wall of Doom or the Void Portal, as they both feel more out of some crazy cosmic horror game than a Final Fantasy one. It has its issues, don't get me wrong. The cast and the story aren't exactly the most memorable the franchise has ever dropped, especially in regards to the antagonist. But even with its shortcomings, it's still a genuinely fantastic game, and arguably one of the strongest of the Pixel era. To the point where it's only beaten out by one other Pixel game, but we'll get to that one later. So this final part was hard. Like, really hard. Like, to the point I genuinely struggled to think where these last 3 would go in which order, because I do think all of these games are the pinnacle of the franchise. So after a bit of thought, a little bit of alcohol, and a lot of contemplation, I think I picked the perfect ending for these 3, with Final Fantasy X taking up the 3rd place spot. There is so damn much this game does right, it's actually insane to think about. Being the first big foray into the PS2 allowed this game to really shine with its graphical style upgrade, with multiple cutscenes that even to this day hold up with some of the best in the business. Some of the most interesting and well-designed turn-based combat ever created for an RPG, which introduced the concept of turn order systems, and more importantly the introduction of the sphere grid, which I feel like was the main concept for evolving the concept of skill trees and knocking them into the mainstream. All of which comes packaged in a fantastic story with some of the series' most endearing characters, where you're joined by one of the greatest racists in video game history with Wakka.
Don't go near Albert anymore, okay? They're trouble.
The only thing that keeps it from being perfect is not only its linearity, but some of its boss fights are just genuinely not fun. But even with those restrictions, this is arguably one of the best Final Fantasy games, and maybe even one of the best titles Square has ever released. Fuck Blitzball though. Man, I was fighting with myself for days upon days on whether or not this would be the number 1 spot. Because not only is Final Fantasy IX arguably one of the finest RPGs I've ever played, it's also the RPG that ended up getting me more into trying out more Final Fantasy titles once my good friend Peyton recommended it to me, which later went on to me making Final Fantasy X my 500 sub special, then 15, and then playing through the rest of them. And man, I am eternally grateful he told me to play it. 9 is just nothing short of fantastic. Going with a more back-to-basics approach after 8 kind of tried too hard to be different, the return to form really allowed this title to shine so amazingly. Super fun ATB combat, mixed together with cool abilities you learn from equipping weapons and armor, along showcasing the greatest strength of the PS1 era by creating an overworld with tons of cool areas to find secret weapons and abilities at. 9 also has what I'd argue to be one of the strongest casts in the entire series, with a fantastic story that blends humor and seriousness together with a genuine heart that makes each character arc in the game genuinely great to follow. There's so much to genuinely love about this little title that I usually wouldn't have a problem putting it at the number 1 spot outside of one issue, and that's the sluggishness of the gameplay. Nowadays you can easily fix this issue either with fast forwards or PC mods. The sluggishness of the gameplay ended up making a lot of the fights longer than necessary. It's the one major blemish that really keeps it from hitting my number 1 spot. That said, this is still one of the best Final Fantasies, and I will always recommend people play it because it is just that good. Although it doesn't compare to my number 1 spot, which is... As our long review journey finally comes to an end, and I've said out loud for why every Final Fantasy so far I've either liked or disliked, there has been one that has been chosen to stand above all the others. One that was secured as my absolute favorite. And it, without a doubt, is the one known as Final Fantasy VI. I adore this title. What started off as an innocent curiosity about a year ago for a title that a lot of people seem to love ended up blossoming into something that would become one of the best games I've ever played. From gameplay that really showed the pure pinnacle of SNES active time battle combat, to one of the most unique gameplay mechanics with the Magitek system that allowed every character to learn any spell in a game, to an immensely gripping story with some of the best written characters in the entire franchise, like Sabin, Edgar, and of course, Terra and Cells. And who could forget that this title hosted the greatest fucking villain they've ever created in the form of Kefka. No, not that bum-ass gacha mommy. I'm talking about the real video game mommy. I'd suck from those Kefka titties. This, and so many other reasons, are why I consider it not only the best Final Fantasy game, but one of the best games ever made. And I highly recommend anyone who hasn't gotten around to it to play it whenever you can. And legit, go play it right now. It will blow your nuts off. Or your girl nuts if you have those. And with my final piece said, that's the end of the video. And with it, another birthday has passed. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for the birthday wishes if you left them down below in the comments. If you're ever up for a chat, go check out my Twitch or my Discord. And if you're interested in supporting me and my endeavors, go check out my Patreon. I'll leave the link down below next to the Twitch and Discord. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.